Welcome to Streets and Eats, the podcast where we want to inspire your next trip by telling you about some fantastic destinations and, of course, the best food to eat while you're there. But remember, until the world is open completely and you feel safe to travel again, just use this time to research and plan. That's why we're giving you some travel tips and stories to keep you thinking about travel, because pretty soon we're all going to be out there having fun. So this week, we're going to be talking about part 2 of our road trip podcast that we started last week. We've got more tips and advice for planning your road trip and some great ideas for awesome road trips around the world.
So let's start with the planning. I think that's kind of where we left off last week. So when I'm planning, of course, well, we're Streets and Eats, so we should talk about the eats. I like to start thinking about the food first.
You mean what you're going to eat or where you're going to eat?
Well, what, where? You know, sometimes the road trip is to a food destination. Maybe a farmer's market is that you're heading to, or in Italy, an agriturismo, where you're going to spend the night and eat a fantastic farm-to-table meal.
Or maybe these are some ones that I want to do. Like next on my list is to do the Hatch Chili Festival down in New Mexico. That just happened a couple of weeks ago, and I just want to be there so bad. And another one I really want to do is in Louisiana, and it's like the Boudin Trail, where you're looking for all the homemade sausages that people make in the area.
Right.
So you're right. A lot of times, especially for you and me, the road trip itself is about food.
Based.
However,
but that's not the only food planning that you need to make for a road trip. You do need to eat on a road trip. And I mean, we've been in some situations where finding a place to eat has been pretty tricky. So you have to have a good idea of where you're going, what's available, and do you need to bring something to, tide you over on the way there? I can remember one road trip we were taking with some friends. Remember that one in I think it was in Gordian?
In Turkey?
In Turkey. And Gordian is this ancient city where King Midas was the ruler. And it's these really incredible ruins that are just kind of out in the middle of nowhere.
That no one ever goes to.
Yeah. And they're usually deserted.
They're
one
forgotten.
Or two other visitors. The grounds guard is there, and they'll usually open the gate for you if it's closed. But other than that, you're on your own. And in this case, I think there is one small little cafe in the area, but it takes you quite a while just to get out there. And driving around the countryside in Turkey, especially in that area, when you're hungry, you better have food, because you're not going to just pull off and, get a McDonald's. Worst case, that's not an option. So on this particular trip, I had thought ahead. I planned like we always recommend, and I made 2 gallon-sized Ziploc bags full of my personal favorite trail mix. The deluxe mixed nuts. I don't like a lot of peanuts in my trail mix. Peanut M&Ms.
I knew you were going to say that next. I was like, I don't like peanuts, but I want those peanut M&Ms.
If I'm going to have peanuts, it's going to be peanut M&Ms, because you need a little chocolate taste too.
Cranberries.
Dry cranberries or raisins, maybe some fruit chips, banana chips, dried fruit, that type of thing. This
Whatever
was a great
it was a good
mix.
And we were with 3 other people other than
we had
me.
3
so
friends
we had a
with
car
us.
full.
And I'm driving
adults.
around the whole time, and 3 friends are in the back, you're in the front, and we're just having great conversations. We're stopping here, we're stopping there, we're taking photographs, we're being chased by huge
Turkish
shepherd dogs, rolling through villages, just having fun. And I get a little hungry, a little peckish. And I said, well, we did bring some trail mix. Can you guys pass up a bag of trail mix? Well, this was like 3 hours into the day, maybe 4 hours into the day. They pass up the bag, and there's only 2 small handfuls left. So while I did plan and I brought some snacks, clearly it wasn't enough. So really you have to keep that in mind, and maybe trail mix, when there's no meals to be had, isn't really an option. Isn't
enough. I wouldn't say it's not an option. It's just
isn't enough.
And we're talking, out in the middle of nowhere, Turkey. However, just this past summer. We were on a road trip through the Midwest, and we were driving in Iowa and Kansas for hours.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say there was no place to stop, but there were very few places to stop. And if it was something that you didn't really want a place that looked a little bit too shady for you or whatever, not just you, but anybody, and we ended up one day, we did not eat lunch, quote unquote, until 5:00. And then we probably wouldn't have eaten at this place either. It looks so sort of run down, but
But there are no options.
Starving. So the point is, yes, you want to know.
Have a plan on where you're going to eat.
And make sure that you plan during the trip to have some snacks.
Yes, have contingency. Because in that particular case, driving through Iowa and Kansas that you were talking about, we had actually left our planned route, and we took more of a back roads drive through the states.
Which we loved.
Which was excellent, except
gorgeous.
Because they were back roads through very small towns. Yeah. There weren't really restaurants along the way.
There were just very few eating options. And I'm sorry, but meat sticks and
trail mix,
sugary donuts just aren't going to cut it after a while. You need some
need something real.
So anyway, so you want to plan for your food.
So you could pack some sandwiches in the morning. That's always a good way to do it. What are some other good options?
Well, I think sandwiches are always good. Or you could just have a bottle of peanut butter and jelly.
Yes.
In your car all the time. Or crackers.
Well, that's my go-to is the peanut butter and jelly and the whole wheat Ritz crackers.
Back in the day, it was potted meat or what were those Vienna sausages.
Yeah.
However,
not for me.
I mean, I always kind of balked at those as a kid, understandably, maybe. But now you can still have, there's some canned things that are pretty good that you could have, some good sardines with, mustard or tomato sauce, or,
smoked salmon.
Smoked salmon. Yeah. You can make a dip. You can bring some good, crackers with you. There's lots of things that you could do that you wouldn't necessarily need to have a cooler, but having a cooler is always, of course, a good idea as well.
And this is one area where, in other countries, there are better options. Where
sometimes it depends on the place.
Yeah, it depends on the place. But there could be bakeries, there could be a butcher, there could be a candlestick maker. I think that's our running joke. But you can find things along the way. And that's also an option on a road trip anywhere. If you can find a supermarket that's open. Again, on that trip through Iowa and Kansas or in the back country of Turkey, those weren't really options.
Let me tell you, if you're in Belgium, plan on eating lunch at the gas station. They always have the best gas station sandwiches. So good.
Oh, yeah. That was a Q8.
Yeah, Q8.
Near Brussels, I think.
Mm-hmm.
They had excellent little baguette sandwiches.
So delicious.
Really tasty. Well, but you also need to be aware of restaurant closures. I mean, it's very common in these days right now that a restaurant that would maybe normally be open for business during the hours that you're looking is not open because of COVID-19. So be aware of that. This is a great time for road tripping since it's not a good time for air travel, but it will affect what's available.
And we did talk about that a little bit on our pandemic,
right?
After pandemic travel podcast. But it's worth repeating that even though road tripping is great during COVID, during this pandemic, because you're isolated to the people you're always with anyway. And so you're only breathing in air of those people around you that you know well. And then you're out in the middle of nowhere or you're on a road and, you stop to do things and wear your mask everywhere you go. But it has changed as far as what's open and what's available.
Yeah.
And you do have to plan it. You have to sort of look ahead at the Google map and say, okay, I should be eating lunch around this town. What should I go for when I'm there?
Yes.
Which for us is fun too.
But then make sure also that you have some alternates in mind because you might get there and find out that for some reason it's closed. It's more common that that's going to happen nowadays than it used to be in the past.
It really is.
And also in some areas of the world, if you're not eating during a specific time, a lunchtime or dinner time, if you're looking for food between 2 and 5, there may not be anything open. So, those hours could really be a factor as well.
So my favorite story about this is Jim's sister and her boyfriend flew to Austria, and they were going to drive through the Alps. Well, they did drive through the Alps. They had a wonderful time. So they did exactly what we're talking about. They flew in, they picked up a rental car, and then they did this huge road trip, and they had a great time. But I think they missed lunch every single day.
Right.
Because
Austria is very much a country that does that.
Up in the Alps is very rural. And when the restaurant is finished serving lunch, it's finished serving lunch and it locks its doors until, like Jim said, 5:36.
Yeah.
And then it reopens. So she was talking to us on the phone, and that was her one big complaint, was that they didn't get lunch the whole time they were there. They were really hungry. So just be aware.
Yeah. And that's happened to us.
It's happened to us too.
We're more aware of it now. And I think apps do a better job of showing you hours than they used to. So I think it's not as big of a problem, but
I've also
you should be aware of it.
That with one of the horrible things about the pandemic is that it's hard to keep up. They might say it's temporarily closed. It might not say anything. It might be closed forever. It's I'm not saying don't check it or don't try and do that, but like Jim said, have backups, because it's hard to keep up. People are closing left and right.
Yes.
So bring food,
yes.
pack lunch. You maybe have your camp stove and fuel in the back of your car, and you can do some easy one-pot meals. Or if nothing else, you can make some coffee and hot tea.
Yeah, that's right. Or bring some instant oatmeal.
Instant oatmeal is, well, you know what? It's like the perfect food to bring along, because you can put it in water and it's quick, but you can also go to the grocery store and get a yogurt and put it in the yogurt, and then half an hour later you'll have a heartier yogurt as well.
And it's also serves as a good breakfast if you're staying in a place that doesn't have breakfast, or you don't have a breakfast option. It's good to have that. It's good to have something.
I think if you're traveling in the States, almost everywhere has breakfast options, but that's not true in other parts of the world.
That's a fact. We used to bring cold cereal, dry cereal, like Cheerios and stuff like that for the kids to snack on. That's a great snack as well.
Well, back in the day, do you remember these? They used to have those big, huge multi-variety packs. Like you'd have 12 different kinds of Kellogg cereal.
Oh, yeah.
And everybody fought over the Frosted Flakes and I don't know what there was.
What are those
yellow puffy things?
The Corn Pops. Oh, I miss Corn Pops.
And then there were some that never
you
got
always
eaten.
got to the end and the Wheaties were left.
Yeah.
Or the Raisin Bran, although I love Raisin Bran.
But those were
that
always
was good for me.
Yeah, those were always fun, because it's just like, oh, what am I going to have today?
We've also had like a cooler that you plug in to the lighter, and it keeps things cold that way. That's a great option as well. Or just a cooler with, frozen waters in it. So that way you have waters to drink that are cold as you go along, and it keeps things cold for the day as well. And then at the end of the day of driving, if you're staying in a hotel, you can refill the water bottles and freeze them overnight, and then you'll have it ready for the next day as well. But drink lots of water. It's very easy on a road trip to forget about water.
Or to stop and get sugary drinks.
Yeah, or coffees.
Which, if you're young, we're not so young anymore, so that's not good for us. If you're young and you can handle it, you do you, boo. But for me, I can't rely on those soda fountains.
And I always tell people anyway, no matter your age, you still need to drink lots of water.
That's true.
You don't want your brain drying up. And if you stay away from, or at least limit your sugary caffeine drinks, you won't have to stop for bathroom breaks as often. Drinking the water, it really isn't what makes you need to go to the bathroom. It's the caffeine and those diuretics that make you need to.
Yeah, but we all need coffee. I don't know about you, but I need coffee.
Well, and I do like a good latte on the road in the morning.
Especially in the fall.
I know it's a road trip then. A coffee cup in one of the cup holders, empty beer cans tumbling out the door when you stop.
Beer cans.
Road trip.
Yeah.
No, don't drink and drive.
Please don't. I do think we should talk about how you find good restaurants for places. The United States, again, is pretty simple. You basically look at all the different kinds of reviews in either Yelp or Google
Maps.
But depending on where you're traveling, whether it's Canada or whether it's in Europe, say France, you've got to figure out which app they're using. And a lot of times you can do this before you go on Reddit or something, or go on a Facebook group and say, what's the best app
for finding reviews?
What do the locals use? And that way you can get, because you don't want to do TripAdvisor. Not that TripAdvisor is necessarily bad, but typically TripAdvisor are people who are tripping.
Yes, they're tourists.
They're tourists, just like you.
They're
so they
locals.
don't have a clue what's good in that town.
Yeah.
It might have been tasty and they enjoyed it.
Yeah.
But they don't
and
know
they got
that
good
it's
service.
Yeah.
But they don't know if that's like really good quality for that area as well as a local would.
And maybe if it is a touristy restaurant, you're paying too much, or there's lots of things that go into that. So it's best, one of the questions to ask before you go is to find out what people are doing reviews on. And we used
How
to look
do the locals find good restaurants?
We used to even use it in Japan. What do they use in Japan? Do you remember?
You stumped me. I don't remember. We'll look it up and we'll put it in the show notes.
We'll look it up. But here's the thing.
Or it'll pop in my head in a few minutes.
It's always in Japanese, but that's not a problem because you use Google
Translate
on your phone.
Google Translate. That's right.
So no language should be a deterrent. In fact, you want to find those in the local language so that you know that you're getting the best.
And this is kind of a good food tip. Well, it's a good road trip tip anyway. If you are doing this internationally, where English is not the language. So many people that I've talked to and I've told this don't know that you can put Google Translate on your phone and you don't need to type into it or speak into it. You can, but you can also just use the camera function. Hold the phone up with the Google Translate running in photo mode and point your phone at the menu and it will translate it while you're looking at it.
Right before your eyes. We were in Paris. Remember that?
Paris.
First of all, translating menus anywhere in the world is just so much fun because of the way they speak versus the way that we speak. And anyway, we were in Paris and we're translating all the things. And it just, to me, it's magical. I mean, the letters even sort of move before your eyes into what you can read, not something you couldn't read to something you can read. So that's just magical to me. But then you read things like, and I'm making this up, but something like lips of cow, loving the milk. And you're like, what the heck?
It can give you some very interesting
and really
translations.
Something simple like, a steak with gravy. I mean, I made that one up, but it is always fun to read those anyway. So
sous vide beef cheeks.
Yeah, sous vide beef cheeks. Yeah.
Yeah, that can be really, really interesting.
And it's so much fun. Everybody's laughing.
Okay. So the app that I like to use in Europe was the Michelin Guide.
Yes.
I mean, everybody's heard of the Michelin Guide, right? 2 stars, 1 star, Michelin chef. Well, it's not just for finding Michelin star restaurants. If Michelin has reviewed a restaurant and given it, they have a whole range of levels that it can have. A bib gourmand. We always called it the knife and fork or the plate or 2 knives and forks. You can get some really good reviews there
and recommendations. Because even
they were never wrong.
They were never wrong. Never. And it's just, even at a bib gourmand, or one that they've reviewed is going to be pretty good to begin with because they've been invited there to review it.
Yeah. Well, in their guide, they only are presenting what they recommend.
Yeah. So it's all good.
If it's not in the guide, maybe they just haven't eaten there. That's true. But probably they have, and they just don't recommend it. So, you do the math. In Europe, especially in France, I pretty much stuck with the Michelin Guide, and it never failed us, like we said.
Right.
So you don't have an app you have to go to the old standby, where to eat.
Oh, if you don't have an app, I think we may have mentioned this
We've
before.
talked about this before.
But really, you want to look for places that are turning over.
Look for places that are busy.
Which is sometimes hard. I mean, you're out and depending on how you travel and where you go. Now in the city, that's not hard. Obviously, if there's people in the restaurant, I mean, make a decision. But if you're out in the middle of nowhere, you're out in the middle of nowhere.
And you may not have a lot of options anyway.
Do you remember? Okay, so we were in Australia and we were in the outback and we were coming back from Undara, which is this, if you go to Australia up in New Queensland, is that what it's called? In Queensland. There's a place called Undara and it's fantastic. And we were driving back from there and we went through a town called
Mount Surprise.
And there was not much to this town.
No.
Not much at all. But you know what there was? A cafe that had so many trucks outside of it. All the truck drivers had gone there to eat dinner. And it was closing. We got there like at 6:30 and it was closing like at 7:30 or something. And yeah, it was a good meal. And and we knew we were in the right place because here's a whole line of trucks outside. We had to hike up the hill half a block because it was so much people parking there.
Yeah.
So look for the lines.
Look for the fresh food, the freshly roasted pig coming off the spit in Croatia, or the lambs and the camels tied up in front.
Oh, don't say
alive.
That. It's
so
true.
You know it's going to be fresh.
They're true. These are true things. Delicious too.
But look for where the people are. Okay, where to stay. So here's another choice, I guess, that you need to make in planning. Maybe you want to do a camping trip. Maybe you just want to stay in hotels. Maybe you want to do a hybrid and do a mix of both. We've done glamping road trips where in Botswana, for instance, where we self-drove between different safari parks and we stayed in luxury tents each place we went.
Or rondavelles, which is like a little hut.
Or other levels of tents.
Yeah.
And campgrounds.
If you're road tripping in Africa as a foreigner, typically you're going to be staying in pretty nice places. And even if it is tents, they're going to be like, I think one of the least fancy, I'm sure it was a 0-star, was a quote unquote glamping where we had these huge tents with 2 little cots in them. And a camping area where you didn't have a bathroom as part of it. That most of them at least had their own bathroom facilities and stuff. But this was the lowest of the low that we had stayed in, and it was still very comfortable.
Yeah. And
there was an overlander truck there. Lots of people stopped at this place, including Prince Harry. We know for a fact because we saw him there.
Yeah. He didn't stay there though. He just came for lunch.
He didn't stay there. He just came to talk to the owner.
He was on his own road trip.
Have lunch. Well, he was on a boat trip.
So, but these are choices you got to make up front. They're going to affect what you bring, of course, but they're also going to affect if you need to make reservations along the route. And here's where some spontaneity kind of kicks in. If you're really spontaneous, you may not want to make a reservation for each night of your trip on a place to stay. And we've done that in quite a few different places where, in fact, in Greece, we were doing a road trip from Athens up into Delphi and then all the way up to Thessalonica. And we would just make our reservations on the road a couple hours before we knew where we were going to need to stop. And booking.com worked just fine for that. I think there's only one place where we booked a place 2 hours down the road. We got there and they didn't have the reservation. So we had to scramble and find a place for that night. But otherwise, other than that, it worked perfect. But ideally, you'll know in the morning how far you're going to get that day, where you want to stop for the night. And you can make the reservation that way.
You can do that.
But I don't like just rolling into a town.
It depends on what time you're rolling in. There's nothing worse than being hungry and cranky and tired.
And not having a place
to stay. In my opinion.
And finding out that every place you stop doesn't have something available. Yeah, you don't want to be in that position.
So make reservations for the whole trip if you want to, but that doesn't allow for spontaneity, or just do it sort of on the way as you go.
Yeah.
One time, the really bit us in the butt because we didn't make reservations, and here we are driving, and we get to the hotel the night before, and we're in the mountains of Italy. And so we know we're staying in Italy. We're going to another town in Italy. We know where we're going. We look it up on Booking. We book it, and we get there, and they're like, no, we didn't get there. What did we do? We checked it. What happened exactly? We found out at some rate.
We're on the way to the hotel, and I get a text telling me about the upcoming trip, which is only a couple hours away. We think only a couple hours away. And it ends up that this was my bad. I think if it's the same one you're thinking of.
It is.
I booked a hotel that was named for the place where we were heading because there was a hotel that we've stayed in with a very similar name. And so it was the place name. I forget it. Maybe it was
too. But the point
but
was
it ended
that was
up being a hotel that just happened to have the same village name that we were going to in its name, but it was on the other side of Italy somewhere.
Like 7 hours past or something. So we ended up having to cancel that. Luckily, we figured it out before we actually got there, so we could cancel it, and then we booked another place. And it turned out as it wasn't a problem at all.
We just showed up at the hotel that we thought we had the reservation in anyway. Told them the funny story. Luckily, they had a room, and it wasn't an issue.
Yeah, and we stayed there a few times. That's a great place.
Yeah.
I don't remember the name of it off the top of my head.
We'll get it. We'll put it in the show notes.
Okay.
Okay. So other reservations you really need to think about if you're camping. Used to be you could just roll up and camp somewhere. You can still find some places where that's not a problem. But if it's a national park, if it's a really popular one, especially, you really need to make those reservations pretty far in advance.
We've been to, 20 national parks this summer, this last few months, and every single one of them has been completely booked for camping.
Yeah.
Completely booked. 100%.
So if you're going to camp, of course, you need to bring everything you need for camping. And then we've done like I said, what I call camping light, where we bring everything we need for camping. We've got a tent, we've got sleeping bags. We've got all that stuff. We usually bring a small stove where we can at least make hot drinks, like you were saying. But we don't really plan on eating any meals in the campground because who wants to deal with all that cleanup? You're on a road trip. It's not a camping trip. The camping is just a place to stay along the way. That's usually got some really beautiful nature, and you're out in the woods. That's great stuff. But the road trip is to actually go somewhere
and experience the food.
The food. So we'd just get up and go get breakfast somewhere, or pack up and hit the road for the next destination. That's that sort of thing. So it's not, camping light is not going on a camping trip. It's your accommodations for your road trip. For the trip. And we've done that where
we've done it millions of times.
A lot of places.
Maybe not millions.
And we've also done some where we didn't bring the camping gear, but you could still find places in campgrounds to sleep, which is really a good option sometimes.
We have done that.
In Prince Edward Island, we stayed in a fifth wheel that was in a campground that they were just renting out by the night. And that was an amazing stay. We were right on this grassy field overlooking the beach and the water out and around us. And it's beautiful. And we weren't camping on that trip at all. We also we found in Australia on that trip.
Australia, we
Queensland
did it the whole way.
Brisbane, we stayed in a lot of campgrounds where they had cottages in the campgrounds.
And they even have them here in the States too.
They
like
definitely
KOAs have cottages.
A lot of campgrounds
a lot of places have yurts. And like Jim said, even, RV parks sometimes will have people renting out their RV or whatever.
Right.
So there's lots of choices. If you are coming camping, then you need to bring, a few things. Jim's all about the food. So if you're going to cook then you need, just the basic stuff, stove and gas. Make sure you have the right propane hookup.
We have a little nonstick frying pan for cooking eggs.
But we also,
and small
actually,
things.
our camping equipment thing, other than the stove, we bring our frying pan, we bring a water pot that you can plug in or heat up. We have both. And then a couple of things that we always need. And we actually take those to Airbnbs too, because
Sure, because you never know what you're going to get.
I'm pretty picky about the pan that I cook my eggs in. So that could go both ways. It just depends on what you like to eat. For us, we actually love eating out breakfast, but it's also the one we're going to skip, because why spend that extra $20 when you don't need to?
Right. That's right. And one of the things that I kind of was an aha moment for me this summer as we were traveling around was seeing those campgrounds. Most state parks in the campgrounds have electric and water hookups at the sites for the trailers. But you don't need to be in a trailer to stay in those sites. You could be in a tent and have electricity at your tent site.
And maybe we're the last to come to this party.
Well, there's plenty of people who knew about it.
There were plenty of people in tents who were at the electric stations, and they had their plug-in grills, and they had their coffee pots, and
strip lights and stereos, and
that's right, lots of lights, and
TV.
Yeah, they had all kinds of stuff, and Jim and I are looking at each other like, we would have never thought of that.
Right,
it was pretty genius.
So you have to be careful when you're packing your car for a road trip.
Not to overpack.
It's really easy to say, hey, I'm taking the car. I take all this stuff. And then you end up with a super full car. And packing along things that you never ended up using. So
I get annoyed if I pack something I don't use.
Yeah.
At myself. I get annoyed at myself.
And then I make sure I don't pack it the next time.
So of course you want your photography equipment. Even if you're using an iPhone, a good thing to have for that is your stabilizer. I was taking some road trip video just yesterday.
Through the Chinook Pass in Washington.
It was gorgeous.
Amazing fall colors.
And here I am holding my iPhone, and where's my stabilizer? Back at the house. And I'm going up and down as we're going over these roads, and it's beautiful around. Trying to get pictures of Mount Rainier. So just get one of those stabilizers. It makes life so much better, especially if you're going to be taking videos, because we all love videos. Come on.
And make sure also that you check before you leave that you have all your cables to charge everything, extra batteries, all that stuff. These are all things that should be on your packing list. And for the car, of course, make sure you've got your USB chargers that reach in the back if someone's sitting in the back. I saw in this one car this last summer again, they had iPad holders for the back seats. So,
which is perfect for the kids. They were all watching their own movie.
Yeah. Now, we don't recommend that you let your kids watch movies down through a whole road trip.
Yeah, for the whole road
trip. But there's certainly
Mm-hmm.
going to be times where that's a good thing for them to do.
Well, there is a point. There is a point when everybody's done.
Yeah.
That's the point.
And you still have an hour of driving time, or an hour and a half of driving time.
And
that you have to go.
We trained our kids when they were nice and young. You can yell and scream and fight and pinch and do whatever, as well as we're not on a road that's in the middle of a city. You get to a city,
it's quiet time.
It's quiet time. And it's hilarious, because if you rode with us to this day, we'll be making all kinds of noise, and we'll drive in a city, drive into the city, and everybody quiets down, because that's when we're looking for things. That's when there's traffic that you're not used to.
Unfamiliar.
You're not used to the roads. So it's just
the radio's
funny.
off.
So I would say that would be aware nowadays, a time nowadays when you would want to use that. So the kids are quiet and working and doing their own thing.
Yeah. So make sure you have all the cables for all that stuff. I have a little zipper bag that I keep all that stuff in. Okay. The other thing you need to plan for the road is money. In some places, you can roll around for days without having any cash and just whip out your credit card and pay for everything as you go. It's not a problem.
In some places, Sweden, they're not going to take your cash.
There are some places where they won't take cash.
So you need to know before you go if it's a cash society or not. Nowadays, it's fewer and fewer places that will not take cash. That's nice, but they still exist.
Yeah.
I used to love watching Jim go to the ATMs in Uganda. We were in Uganda for a 2-week road trip, and it was The first time was the funniest of all. He gets up there, and this is me watching from the car. I just think this is so hilarious. The next thing I know, Jim's got some man like leaning over him, and I'm thinking, is that guy trying to steal? You never know, right? Is that guy trying to steal from him? And then he's like pointing to him. I don't know what he was doing. I mean, you can explain, but it just looked hilarious. And then he got more and more people around him.
Well, first of all, I say to bring cash because you want cash for emergencies, but you don't want to bring all cash because you don't want to get robbed. And what we found is you can use an ATM almost everywhere. So in Uganda, that's how you got cash, was at the ATM. They were trying to go cashless, but it really wasn't working. And you really couldn't pay for things without cash. So ATMs at the banks were the place to go. And they were always super crowded.
We're
talking like lines of 20 people. And when I'm talking about a line in Uganda at an ATM, it's almost scary the first few times that you do it, because it seems like their idea of personal space is completely different than my idea of personal space. So everyone is standing 2 inches apart. Like really, they're brushing up against you front and back.
Even if you're at the machine.
And it's really a community event using the ATM.
A community event.
Really, because you're right. He wanted to help me, even though I knew what I was doing, and I certainly didn't want him seeing my PIN. But before that, what you didn't see was an older lady who was lost. She didn't know how to use it. And so the 2 or 3 people behind her in line were helping her use the ATM, helping her put in her PIN, helping her select how much money to get out. It's a wonder to me that no one gets robbed that way, but I never saw any problems, and I never had any problems. I did make sure I shielded my PIN as I was putting it in. But if they wanted to show me the different screens, it was all in English. I don't think I've ever had to use an ATM anywhere in the world
that didn't have an
English option.
Yeah, me neither.
So an ATM is really the best bet. Plan on using the ATMs and bring a credit card. Bring 2 different credit cards in case one gets locked, and have a way to be able to contact your bank. Before you leave, contact your bank, contact your credit card company. There's usually a form you can fill out online, or you can call them and tell them, I'm going to be traveling internationally. That way your card won't get locked.
And I think the banks are getting better at that.
Yeah.
I think they've had a sketchy history. I've definitely gotten locked out before when I've done that, but that was...
But ATMs everywhere. I always try to make sure it's in a bank lobby or at least on a bank wall. It's less likely to have been tampered with. In Turkey, they were everywhere. You would just see these little ATM kiosks, like in a neighborhood. It was bizarre. But I like that. I mean, you could always get cash. We talked about the phones. Bring your cables. Of course, we have forgotten cables before. It's not a huge deal.
I think we've done we've made every mistake in the book before, for sure. And with phones especially, I mean, from leaving phones on the airplane to not having charging cables to dropping them in an ocean to you name it, we've
having
done
them
it.
Stepped on in Uganda.
Oh yeah. Having them stepped on, crushing the
Well, but if you're bringing a phone internationally, especially, you really need to be aware of what your plan covers. Does it cover international travel? How much international travel does it cover? We have been using Google Fi lately, which actually works great for international. It's the same rate no matter where you are. Sometimes there's a bit of delay when you first get into a new country as it picks up the system. But it's great because we don't ever have to pay extra for international. You can, and we've done this too before we got Google Fi. You can usually get a SIM for pretty cheap. To me, it was always astounding how much cheaper data rates are in Europe than they are in the US. You could get a €12 SIM card to put in your phone that's going to give you 5 to 10 gigabytes of data, which is enough for a 1 or 2 week trip. They're usually pretty easy to use. You can buy them in Europe. You can buy them at kiosks, at phone stores, tobacco stands, supermarkets.
You have to have an unlocked phone, though.
You have to have an unlocked phone, and it's usually pretty easy to do it yourself. You might need to be in a Wi-Fi area.
It's hard to get an unlocked phone a lot of times in the States. Yeah. You really, when you're getting your next phone, you need to look into that because it does make life easier if you decide to do international travel.
Yeah.
If you don't, then it's,
I've always bought my own phone. I'd never have gotten a phone through a phone plan, and that's when it's going to be locked if you're getting it through a phone plan. But that's my choice. And after you've paid for the phone, if you are on a plan, you can take it in and ask them to unlock it. And most times they will. Not always, though.
It depends on them.
But it's a good question to ask if you're switching plans. Can I unlock my phone? When can I unlock my phone? And just be aware of that.
Nowadays, leaving your home empty is a lot easier than it used to be because they have all these systems where you can set up on a rotating basis when to turn lights on, when to turn them off, things like that.
Get Ring cameras.
But some of the things that you want to make sure that you're not doing is posting on social media when you're leaving, the dates of your trip, where you're going, how long you're going to be gone, and all that kind of stuff, because that will definitely maybe bring some people out of the woodwork that you don't want coming around your house. And it's also good to have a Ring or a webcam. Yeah.
And you have a family member, if you've got someone or a friend in the area that can just swing by every couple of days and make sure like no deliveries have been made or mail's piling up somewhere. Just make, those common sense things that sometimes we forget about. And, turn off your oven, unplug your appliances before you leave. And if you're traveling with a partner, they do the same exact thing after you've done it, just to be sure. So you don't get halfway down the road and say,
did I leave the coffee pot on? Yes, I did.
The other person can say, well, if you did, I turned it off. Yeah. And you just have that in your mind of you remembered doing it.
My mother-in-law has a check sheet for everything, and she has check sheets for this. And and you know what? We're probably going to go that way too, because
as you get older,
especially, it's not just as you get older, but there's just too much to remember all the time. And I don't know about anybody else in the world, but even out of the many thousands of times that we've been on road trips, we're still rushing to get out the door in the morning. I don't know what that is. It's just poor planning on our part, I guess.
Well, finally, it's a road trip. You're going to have a vehicle, whether it's your own vehicle or a rental vehicle. You still need to be ready with your documentation. Make sure you've got your license before you leave. If you're traveling international, it's not as common anymore that you need an international driver's license, but it's also not hard to get. You just head out to your local AAA, whether you're a member or not, it doesn't matter. And they'll get you an international driver's license pretty much the same day. It's not like you have to take a test for it or anything like that. An international driver's license is really, it's just a translation of your current driver's license into multiple languages.
It's good for either 1 year or it expires when yours expires. Yeah. Meaning that if you have a year on your license, it'll be the whole year. But if you don't, if this is April and yours expires in November, then it's only good till November. Right. But and your insurance, of course, copy your passport's page. All these things are really important things. Take a photo of your license plate because you're going to need it when you're checking into hotels or whatever. Yep. But the other things that you want to make sure that you have are health insurance cards on you. Maybe nowadays your vaccination card.
Yes.
You want to have prescriptions. Either take a picture of the meds that you're taking or a copy of the prescription itself, because you never know what's going to happen. A lot of people, this just happened over the last 2 years where people were stuck in places they were only planning on going for a couple of weeks or a month, and they were end up being there for 18 months. And you need that information. Years. So just try to be a little bit more aware that it's good to have your information with you.
Yeah, so you take those photos and you email them to yourself, and then they're always in your email. But I also take photos and put them on a note, like an Apple Note on my phone. So it's embedded right in there, and I can put notes about it too. So that's a good way to do it. Well, when it comes to getting out the door and getting on your road trip, we always sit down in the car before we leave and we say, do we have our meds? Do we have our money? And is there one more thing we need? Meds and money. Clean underwear.
Well, I like my camera equipment.
But if you've got your meds, it depends on what your most important
things are to you.
You're going to survive.
Yeah. I mean, you can buy toothpaste anywhere. It's not a big deal. Well, this was the second of our part 2 of road tripping, and we hope we gave you lots of travel tips and ideas. But we love to road trip. We do it all the time. We've done it in so many countries I've lost count. So if you're planning a road trip, or if you're thinking, maybe is this country a good place? Just ask us. Join our private Facebook group, Streets and Eats, and ask the question in there. That's what it's for. We want to keep the conversation going, and we want you to get your questions answered and have a great trip.
And there's just so much more to talk about. Ciao for now.